Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Scott believed that this would be one of the happiest moments of the year. The family trip to Florida had been planned months in advance. Rachel enthusiastically suggested the hotel, and the boys were counting down the days until they could visit the water park nearby. Everything seemed to be falling into place. He had managed to get a rare break from work, and Rachel, despite her heavy workload at the hospital, seemed genuinely excited about the pause. When they arrived at the resort, Scott snapped a photo of the family and sent it to his work group chat, saying this was the kind of rest every programmer deserved. His smile in that picture was real. It still was. On the first day, between swims in the pool and walks around the hotel grounds, Rachel pointed to a man in a blue t-shirt and said he looked familiar. Later, as they returned from dinner with the boys, the same man approached and introduced himself as Grant Taylor, a sales representative for a medical equipment company. He said he knew Rachel from a nursing conference that had taken place years ago in Chicago. Rachel laughed and confirmed it, saying it was a small world. Grant was friendly, charismatic, and quickly struck up a conversation with the boys, offering tips about arcade games in the recreation room. Scott thought the coincidence was strange but stayed quiet. He trusted Rachel. Or at least, he thought he did. The next day, Rachel spent most of the morning at the pool with the kids while Scott relaxed at the swim-up bar. At one point, as he discreetly watched, he saw Rachel talking to Grant again, both sitting on lounge chairs, laughing. Caleb was playing in the water, and Matthew was on his phone. Scott tried to ignore the growing unease. He told himself he might be overreacting. When Rachel returned to the room that evening, she seemed light. She took a shower, got dressed, and suggested they have dinner at a nearby restaurant. Everything went as expected. But that night, when Rachel said she was tired and preferred to sleep early, Scott decided to go out alone and walk around the resort. He didn't have a specific destination, he just wanted to clear his head. As he passed quietly through an outdoor corridor leading to the parking area, something caught his attention. Two figures near one of the pillars were embracing. The light from the street lamp clearly revealed Rachel's face, and seconds later, the kiss. There was no mistaking it. She was in Grant's arms, smiling, tenderly holding his face. Scott stepped back, feeling the ground give way beneath him. Instinct took over. He returned to the room in silence, eyes burning, heart pounding. He lay down on the bed, motionless, staring at the ceiling, waiting. The room was dark, but his thoughts wouldn't stop. Minutes later, he heard the door open gently. Rachel came in unhurriedly, took off her shoes, hung her bag, went to the bathroom, brushed her teeth. All with the casualness of someone returning from a light walk or a random chat in the lobby. She lay down beside him, adjusted her pillow, pulled up the blanket, and let out a soft sigh. She didn't even ask if he was awake. She just turned to her side, as she always did on ordinary nights, as if this one were ordinary too. Scott closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the anger burning inside. He thought about getting up, turning on the light, demanding explanations. He wanted to shout, to ask how long this had been going on, where else he'd been deceived. But when he pictured the boys sleeping in the next room, Caleb with his teddy bear against his chest, Matthew with the blanket pulled up to his nose, he swallowed it all down. The betrayal was painful enough. Turning it into a spectacle in front of the children would be too cowardly. So he stayed there, motionless, listening to the calm breathing of the woman who, minutes earlier, had been exchanging affection with another man. Pretending to be asleep seemed like the role fate had assigned him that night. He accepted it. For now. The next day, Rachel was attentive, asked if he was feeling okay, offered him a light breakfast. Scott replied with short phrases, saying he just wanted to rest a bit. Rachel didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. Or maybe she was pretending. During lunch, she mentioned going back to the pool with the boys. Scott said he preferred to stay in the room. As they left, he locked himself in and stared at the ceiling for long minutes. The image from the previous night played in his mind like a cruel movie. Later, he heard laughter in the hallway and, peeking through the curtain, saw Rachel returning with the kids. Grant was right behind her, holding a bag of snacks. Scott just watched. That night, he pretended to have a headache. Said he didn't want to go out, that he needed to rest. Rachel took the boys to dinner and left Scott in the room with a cold kiss on the forehead. When silence settled in, he got up and went to her purse. He'd never done this before. It wasn't something he normally did. But now, he needed answers. Her phone was there, plugged into the charger, on the nightstand. Scott picked it up with steady hands. The home screen looked harmless, with apps neatly organized in folders, routine notifications from messages and emails. But something caught his eye, a folder with a generic name, simply labeled Docs. When he tried to open it, the system asked for a password. He hesitated for a few seconds. Tried their wedding anniversary. Nothing. Thought of random dates, obvious passwords. Then he took a chance and entered the boys' birthdates, one after the other. The screen unlocked. Inside the folder was a series of screenshots, videos, audio files, and an archived message history. Everything meticulously organized. It was as if Rachel wanted to keep a secret diary of her parallel life. Scott began to read. Messages with Grant were sorted by date, accompanied by emojis, hearts, inside jokes. She called him "my breath of freedom," and in several passages, she described the boredom of marriage, Scott's predictability, her desire to feel alive again. One of the most recent messages revealed that the hotel meeting had been planned weeks in advance. Rachel had suggested the location and date. Grant replied with a winking emoji and a phrase that stuck in Scott's mind: "No one suspects well-rehearsed coincidences." In another exchange, Rachel said Scott would probably spend the day with the boys, giving them a few free hours. Further down, a conversation with Grant mentioned other similar encounters during past trips, and even plans for a future life without having to lie so much. The Florida hotel was just one among many. For Rachel, this wasn't new. It was routine. For Scott, it was proof that the life he thought he was living had been a carefully constructed, and cruelly maintained, illusion. The messages revealed a long-standing intimacy. And something worse, contempt for him. Rachel wrote about how predictable Scott was, how he'd never suspect anything. That hurt more than the kiss. It was the conspiratorial laughter with another man while her husband was treated like a fool. It was the feeling that his entire life had been scripted behind his back. He kept reading. Further down, messages with a friend revealed even more. Rachel complained about Scott mockingly. Said she needed to breathe with someone who understood her. The friend didn't respond with surprise, she seemed to already know everything. Scott put the phone back exactly as he found it. Placed it in the same spot and returned to bed. That night, he didn't close his eyes. Rachel came back with the boys already asleep. She lay down as if nothing had happened. Scott, lying on his back, stared at the ceiling, silent. The next day, he decided this would be the last morning he'd pretend to be the father of a family that only existed for the cameras. He asked to leave early. Said there was a work emergency. Rachel questioned him, but he didn't argue. The trip ended there, with heavy silence during the drive. The kids slept in the back seat. Rachel kept checking her phone. Scott drove with both hands firmly on the wheel, eyes forward, a world collapsing inside him. The drive back to Cleveland was silent. The boys dozed in the back seat, unaware of the storm brewing in their father's mind. Rachel held her phone frequently, typed quick messages, smiled discreetly, as if she weren't sitting next to the man she'd shared the last 13 years of her life with. Scott, at the wheel, pretended the problem was an urgent work email, a deadline he needed to meet, any excuse to avoid questions. That trip did end with a kiss, yes, but not between a couple in love by the seaside. It was between two people who believed they were fooling someone invisible. But Scott had seen too much, read too much, understood everything. In the days that followed, he acted with surgical precision. He locked every emotion away in an imaginary box and began observing everything with new eyes. Rachel woke up, got dressed, prepared the boys' lunches, left for the hospital as she always did. She came home with stories from her shift, talked about patients, the pressure from her boss, her friends. Everything looked the same on the surface. But to him, every word carried a different meaning. Conversations echoed in his mind like well-rehearsed lies. He started reviewing the past, searching for clues, forgotten episodes, signs that hadn't raised suspicion before. That week, he waited until late at night. Rachel was already asleep, her phone beside the bed. He picked it up and returned to the locked folder. The password was still the same. He reread the messages with Grant and, in one of them, saw a comment about keeping memories in a safe place. Scott searched through the Google Drive files synced to the phone. There was a folder with old photos, past trips, and another labeled private. It was hidden and protected by a different password. He tried the hospital's name, then her maiden name. Nothing. Then he tried Caleb's birthdate. Access granted. Inside the folder, he found something he didn't even know existed: digitized copies of medical exams, notes from an ovulation app, screenshots of messages with another man, saved video calls, and a photo that took his breath away: Rachel hugging Brandon Keller, her ex-fiancé, with a caption she wrote, "It was always you." The date on the photo matched a weekend years ago when she'd said she was attending a nursing conference in Detroit, shortly after Caleb was born. Scott closed the phone for a moment, pressed his fingers against his eyes. Took a deep breath and reopened the image. The resemblance between Brandon and Caleb, previously unnoticed, now seemed glaring. The shape of the face, the tone of the eyes, the same crooked smile. A flood of memories came rushing back. The moment he first held Caleb, the doubts he'd had at the time about the conception date, the days Rachel avoided intimacy, saying she was stressed. It was as if everything now took on a new, cruel, undeniable shape. He kept going and found a series of messages with another name, Dr. Henry Morris. The doctor appeared as HM in her contacts. He was the same man Rachel had worked night shifts with for about 4 years at a clinic. In their messages, she sent affectionate voice notes, thanked him for nights when she felt like a woman again, and said Matthew looked like him. Once again, Scott mentally compared them. Skin tone, facial structure, hair type. Everything made too much sense to be coincidence. Scott revisited recent memories with new eyes. He remembered when Rachel had been distant for nearly a month, claiming burnout. The unexplained visits to the clinic. The deleted messages. How she'd dodge questions whenever he asked anything. He began piecing it all together bitterly, like someone discovering they'd lived a story written by someone else. A script in which he merely played the part of father, husband, provider, while other men occupied real spaces in her heart. There was also a curious note in a digital notepad where Rachel listed things to resolve before making any decisions. Among them, check legal consequences of a possible divorce, organize Scott's life insurance documents, and talk to Grant about child custody if everything comes to light. Scott paused. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was planning. Strategy. A woman sharing a bed with him while mapping out a future with someone else, placing each piece with coldness and caution. Even amid crushing pain, he kept control. He wrote down every detail he'd discovered in a notebook. Recorded dates, names, conversations, screenshots. Organized the files on a flash drive and hid it inside an old book on his office shelf. Made copies and saved them in an encrypted cloud. He knew he wasn't just facing a marital crisis. This was an identity reconstruction. What did it mean to be a father, a husband, a betrayed man, all of it needed to be re-evaluated in light of evidence, facts, memories now distorted. That same week, Rachel came home from work more cheerful than usual. She mentioned a possible promotion, suggested a trip for the end of the year, asked if he was okay. Scott pretended to be tired. Said he needed to sleep early. But it wasn't sleep he was looking for that night. It was silence. Time to understand what would come after the truth. The love he felt for the boys was genuine, but now there was a wall between them. Something invisible, yet immense. An abyss no hug or memory could fill the same way again. Scott lay there with his eyes open, listening to the calm breathing of the woman who had turned his home into a stage. The role of fool had been played long enough. Now, he would write his own script. And he'd start from zero. Scott woke up before everyone that Sunday. Sunlight filtered through the window of the boys' room, and the sound of a phone notification pulled him from a light daze. He'd been going through the motions for days, performing basic tasks with precision, like a soldier on a mission. He prepared lunches, replied to work emails, gave instructions in the team group chat, washed dishes. Rachel acted normally, smiled at the kids, left notes on the fridge, asked if he wanted to watch a movie at night. Everything seemed like a performance for the world, while inside, every gesture of hers rang too false to go unnoticed. That morning, he left the house with a simple excuse: he needed to review some code with a colleague before a system delivery. Rachel made a passing comment about him working too much and went back to the kitchen. Scott took the boys to his mother's house and asked them to spend the day with their grandmother. He didn't explain why, but said he needed to take care of some personal matters. His mother noticed his curt tone but respected it. With the boys safe and out of the way, he returned home with a clear objective. He called his lawyer, the same one who helped him when he bought the house. Said it was urgent, that he needed to talk as soon as possible. Scheduled a meeting for the next morning. When he got home, Rachel was stretched out on the couch, watching a show they always watched together. She commented on the episode, laughed at a scene, offered him popcorn. Scott just nodded. He went upstairs, entered the bedroom, and started gathering documents: birth certificates, contracts, bank statements, medical records, anything that could serve as legal groundwork. He also took the flash drive, made another copy of the files, and hid it inside a pair of socks in his travel bag. On Monday, he arrived at the lawyer's office at 8 in the morning. He presented the facts objectively. Showed the screenshots, videos, message files, and notes. The lawyer listened silently, brow furrowed. When Scott finished, he said it was the most solid case of infidelity and paternity concealment he'd seen in years. He asked if Scott wanted to contest the children's paternity. Scott hesitated. Said he was still processing everything. He only asked that the separation process begin immediately and that custody remain temporarily with Rachel until he could restructure his life. The lawyer advised caution. Said this would be emotionally devastating for everyone, especially the boys. Scott agreed but warned, he wouldn't accept emotional blackmail or manipulation. He wanted to walk away clean, dignified, and at peace. That week, he started sleeping in the guest room. Rachel questioned him, but he said he was having trouble sleeping. Slowly, the boys also noticed the change in the house's atmosphere. Conversations dwindled, dinners grew shorter, glances avoided contact. On Friday, Scott came home with an envelope. He waited for the boys to go upstairs for their bath and handed it to Rachel. She opened it, skimmed the contents, and took a while to react. Asked if this was a joke. He replied he didn't joke about serious things. She laughed, a nervous laugh, and said he was overreacting. That they could talk, that they were going through a rough patch, but that it didn't justify ending everything. Scott stayed silent. Just stood up, pointed to the papers in her hands, and said this was only the beginning. Rachel spent the weekend trying to reach him. Sent long messages, cried in corners, said the kids needed stability. On Monday, Scott left the house with 2 suitcases. He rented a small apartment near work. The place was simple, but enough for him to breathe. During the move, he avoided looking Caleb and Matthew in the eyes. He didn't know how to explain yet. Just said Dad needed some time. The boys accepted it silently. The days that followed were hard. He left early, came home late, ate whatever ready-made food he could find, slept little. Loneliness wasn't the issue. The weight of what he'd discovered still crushed him inside. His time in therapy during his military service had taught him how to deal with loss. But this was different. He'd been betrayed by the person who claimed to love him, who shared his bed, who called him "my safe harbor" in front of the kids. Now, he was grieving the entire marriage, the tainted memories, the words that had lost all meaning. The divorce hearing took place 2 months later, amid heavy silence and avoided glances. Rachel entered with a closed expression, clutching a folder to her chest. Before sitting down, she asked to speak with Scott privately. He refused without changing his tone. Her lawyer tried to soften the terms, suggested he be generous, think of the children, make the process easier. Scott remained firm. Said he wanted half of everything: the house, the car, investments, accounts, valuables. He wouldn't give up a single thing. Rachel's eyes widened, surprised by the shift in his attitude. Then came the hardest blow: Scott demanded paternity tests for both boys. Rachel turned red, called it absurd, accused him of gratuitous humiliation. Her lawyer argued it would be traumatic for the children. Scott remained impassive. The judge, faced with the evidence presented and contradictions in testimonies, authorized the test. The results were read at a new hearing weeks later. Caleb and Matthew were not Scott's biological sons. The court, upon confirmation, revoked any child support obligation. Scott wouldn't have to pay a single cent. That made Rachel explode in outrage, saying he was taking revenge, that the children loved him. The judge upheld the decision, basing it on the principle of equitable estoppel, but acknowledged that, in this case, Scott had been intentionally misled, and there was no biological or voluntary, conscious acknowledgement of the facts. Additionally, Scott filed a civil fraud and intentional emotional distress lawsuit, supported by the legal doctrine of intentional infliction of emotional distress, IIED, valid in the United States. The case was judged months later, and he won. He received substantial compensation for moral and financial damages caused by years of deliberate lies. Rachel left that courtroom defeated, without the settlement she expected, without control over the assets she thought she'd have, and with her reputation legally tarnished. Scott, on the other hand, walked out with his head held high, his truth validated by law, his dignity intact. In the years that followed, Scott dedicated himself to rebuilding everything: career, routine, identity. With Rachel's children, the bond was abruptly severed. The truth spoken aloud in the courtroom shattered any illusion of continuity. Caleb and Matthew, though not at fault, represented a pain Scott still didn't know how to handle. There were no birthday calls, no Christmas presents. Not out of revenge, but self-protection. His constant presence might further confuse boys who'd grown up believing in something built on lies. The cut was harsh, but necessary. For a long time, Scott avoided any emotional involvement. He preferred to stay focused on work, evening runs, side projects. Only after nearly 4 years, while providing technical consulting for a school network, did he meet Melanie. She was a literature teacher and coordinated a digital reading project involving the system his company had developed. Their initial conversations were strictly professional, marked by direct emails and objective meetings. But at a corporate integration event, a comment about a Steinbeck novel became the starting point for a more personal exchange. Melanie had been divorced for 2 years and was raising Noah, a curious and polite 10-year-old boy, on her own. When she learned about Scott's history, she didn't pull back. On the contrary, she shared her own experience with a marriage that had also ended in disappointment. Between them, what grew wasn't immediate passion, but relief. It was good to talk to someone who didn't ask invasive questions, who understood silences and respected boundaries. A bond that grew like a stubborn plant sprouting between rocks, slowly, but resiliently. Over time, Noah grew attached to Scott. They spent weekends together, played video games, talked about old movies, read comics. Scott began rediscovering what it meant to build something clean, free of secrets, without hidden layers. When Melanie showed up holding a pregnancy test, he took a while to react. Not out of fear, but because that little piece of paper represented something he thought was unattainable. She said she'd understand if he needed time. He responded with a hug and quiet tears. Grayson wasn't just a daughter. She was the chance to live everything that had been stolen from him. During the pregnancy, Scott made sure to be present for every step. He decided to assemble the nursery himself, chose the name together with Melanie, researched schools and health plans. Every detail mattered. When Grayson was born, he was the first to hold her. Her cry filled an old emptiness. For the first time, Scott was certain nothing needed to be proven, explained, or justified. That little girl was his. Completely his. In the months that followed, the sleepless nights with colic, the diapers, the baths, the feedings exhausted him and filled him at the same time. Grace slept on his chest as if that were the only place in the world where everything was right. And maybe it was. He looked at her with the certainty that his story hadn't ended in a courtroom. It had restarted there, in the silence of the night, with a small breath and a heartbeat resting against his own. After so much pain, he discovered that real love doesn't require effort to seem true. It just is. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.